Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good to see everybody. The scripture we're reading leaves us with a rather somber note, saying that everything is meaningless. This morning, I would like to talk with you about the meaning of life. I was telling, I think I told Terry maybe 3 weeks ago I was going to preach on the meaning of life, but it's actually a kind of complicated subject. It's like trying to solve world hunger in one setting. But I want you to take from this what helps you as we discuss the meaning of life. Peggy Lee, back in 1969, came up with a hit song called "Is That All There Is?" Is that it? I want to ask many of you to put your hands up if you remember that song. But she is not the first person to ask that question. Is that all there is? What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? What does it all mean? Perhaps that question is more meaningful to us when we have found ourselves in a struggle. Perhaps we're burying a loved one. Perhaps we've lost a loved one through a relationship. Perhaps there's something causing you to lay in bed and say, well, what is it all about? Well, we started a series a few weeks ago on the wisdom literature. And Solomon asks that very question. He says to himself, what is it all about? There's a story about a German student who asked that question. And he goes to a preacher in town and he says, what does it all mean? What's the meaning of life? And the priest said, well, I don't know the answer to that question, but he said, I know a professor at the university, and he's a PhD in religious studies. He'll probably know the answer. And so he goes and he asks the professor with PhD. And the professor said, well, to tell you the truth, I really don't know what the meaning of life is. He said, but I do know somebody who probably knows what it is. So he sends him to a guru in India. So he sells everything. He packs up his little knapsack and his bag, and he takes a journey, a pilgrimage to India, and he meets the guru and he says, what is the meaning of life? And the guru said, I don't know. He said, but I know somebody who knows the answer. So he sends him to a monk who lives in the Himalayas. And he gets to the top of the Himalayas, and he's exhausted mentally and physically, psychologically and physiologically. And he says to the monk, I was told you would tell me what the meaning of life is. What is the meaning of life? He said, it's very simple. Life is a river. And he said, what? You mean I've sold everything that I had to come here for you to tell me that life is a river? What kind of garbage is that? And the monk said, you mean life is not a river? The point of the story is there are many people out there who think they know what the meaning of life is. And if you think that this, I used to be able to say young preacher, but this preacher is going to be able to tell you the meaning of life, it's really, I'm not doing that. I'm here to tell you what Solomon concluded in the wisdom literature when he looked in and said, what is the meaning of life? He does kind of an experiment, so to speak. And he takes all of the resources and assets that he has at his disposal, and he says, I am going to conduct an experiment. He said, and what that experiment is going to be is I'm going to figure out exactly what the meaning of life is. How can I obtain happiness? And how can I attain identity with who I really am? And he embarks on this experiment. Okay, you could go back to the scripture. I confused my daughter this morning. And here's what he says. He said I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. He's talking about himself. So enjoy yourself, and behold, it was futility. He said it was meaningless. I said of laughter, it was madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely in how to take hold of folly, until I could see what good there was in the sons of man to do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted them, and all kinds of trees. I made ponds and water for myself from which to irrigate, and forests of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also I collected for myself silver and gold and treasure, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers of the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor. This is my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all of my activities, which my hands had done, and the labor which I exerted. And behold, all was vanity, and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. I like the King James Version, where he says over and over again, all is vanity and vexation of spirit, a chastening after the wind. That's what he says time and time again. And yet, he lists the very things that if you were to ask people, what will bring your life meaning in our culture today, it would be these very things. It would be pleasure. It would be wine. It would be women. It would be things. And he said, I did all that. And he was frustrated. And he had a sense of not only frustration, but consternation. Depression that it's just not there. It was very unsatisfactory to him. He did not find the meaning of life in these things, and yet I find it ironic that we all chase those things as if they're going to give us meaning in life. Jack Higgins wrote 60 novels, one of which was called The Eagle Has Landed. And he grew up in Northern Ireland, but he was born in England. And he was a prolific writer and very famous. And he was asked one time, what do you know now that you wish you had known back then? And without batting an eyelid, he said, I wish someone had told me that when you get to the top of all your achievements, there's nothing there. It's empty. I think it's interesting. The King James Version also, this is a different translation than the one we read from, and I intentionally didn't show it so as not to confuse you. But the King James Version also says that Solomon said, I sought to know madness. That is, not only did he try to understand laughter and pleasure and all, he actually wanted to investigate insanity. And I'll tell you something, if you want to know the meaning of life, sometimes you might just look at an insane person. I think sometimes they get it sooner than we do. And the reason is, if you look at what sane people do every day, you might begin to think he's right. There might be more logic in insanity. We're all living crazy. Eckhart Tolle, in his book, A New Earth, talks about the fact that he was studying in London and he was riding in a train to his university, and there was this crazy woman sitting across from him talking to him herself. And she was saying things like, "Well, I can't believe you said that. That's stupid. How dare you say those things?" And he said he was kind of scared while he sat there and the train went on, and he was glad to get off the train, and he said he walked into the university and here she was. And he was wondering, I wonder, what is it that she is doing here? And so he goes into the bathroom and he says he's washing his hands. And he looks in the mirror and he says, "I hope I don't end up like that." And then he realized, I'm talking to myself. He was a little crazy. And when you look at the things that we do to find meaning in life, it's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit insane. Think about all of the efforts and energy that we use, the ingenuity and the industry that we go about to accomplish great achievements. For what? Think about those who have achieved great things. Let me ask you, is there anyone here that knows the last 3 people who received the Nobel Peace Prize? Nobody. How about the... yeah. Case in point. What about the last Pulitzer Prize, the last American to receive the Pulitzer Prize? What about the last American to receive the Japanese Emperor Treasuries Award after Dr. Edward Deming? These are all major accomplishments. And guess what? We don't remember. But we ourselves are trying to accomplish some great things. For what? For us. Think about that. Solomon is perplexed and he's angry at the fact that nobody will remember. He talks about there's a young man in the city and he saves the city. And he says a generation passes and nobody even remembers who he was. And when we're trying to extend our efforts and our energy to accomplish all of these things, whether it's work, whatever it is, and Solomon said, I tried work, I tried labor, whatever it was, pleasure, I didn't find it. Think about the fact that most people won't even remember it. I mean, how many, is there someone here that knows the first name of their great-great-great-grandfather? John, okay. Anyone else? Okay, we have a couple. To me, that's humbling. I don't know mine. But it highlights the fact that Solomon laments, and that is that we forget those things so often. Because that is not who we are. That does not make us who we are. Who are the last 5 Americans to receive the Medal of Honor? These are major accomplishments. And most of us do not know. What I want us to look at, Katie, you can go to the next slide. A couple of things. Finding meaning and happiness in life. Keep going through. Okay. We've already read those. What I want to illustrate to you is why, and I'm not texting anybody in this modern age. This is where my PowerPoint lays because my iPad wouldn't pick it up. Katie, go to the one that says meaning comes up short in material. But this is Solomon's experiment. And what I want to lay on your heart this morning is, why doesn't pleasure, why doesn't wine, why doesn't women, why doesn't my job bring me the ultimate satisfaction that I seek? Well, I think the answer is somewhat simple. Solomon says in chapter 3 and verse 11 that God has created eternity in our hearts. And that's something we have to keep in mind, that we are eternal beings. And we're going to go to that in just a second. But what we have to realize is what Jesus said in Luke chapter 12 and verse 15. He said, beware, for a man's life consisteth not in the things which he has. Now, there are a good many people today, if you ask, how can I enhance my life? The answer will be, gather more things. Solomon said, that's not it. I've proven that that's not the case. I have a rather lengthy reading from Eckhart Tolle, but I think it really drives home the message. And I want to read it, if you'll give me your attention for just a couple of minutes. And it's in reference to things. He says, but we cannot really honor things if we use them as a means to self-enhancement. That is to say, if we try to find ourselves through them. This is exactly what the ego does. Ego identification with things creates attachment to things, obsession with things, which in turn creates our consumer society and economic structures where the only measure of progress is always more. The unchecked striving for more, for endless growth, is a dysfunction and disease. It is the same dysfunction the cancerous cell manifests, whose only goal is to multiply itself, unaware that it is bringing about its own destruction by destroying the organism of which it is a part. Next slide. Then, he goes on to say, before we read this, we're so obsessed with things and gathering things, we can't even bring ourselves to say that we lost something. Do you ever notice that? If you read the newspaper in the morning, it will say we are having negative growth. We can't even say it. We're just not making anything. We're losing ground. We just still have to throw in that growth because we're obsessed with it. He says a large part of people's lives is consumed by an obsession, preoccupation with things. This is why one of the ills of our times is object proliferation. When you cannot feel the life that you are not likely to fill it up with a life with things. As a spiritual practice, I suggest that you investigate your relationship with the world of things through self-observation, and in particular, things that are designed with the word my. You need to be alert and honest to find out, for example, whether your sense of self-worth is bound up with things you possess. Now, here are some interesting questions. Do certain things induce a subtle feeling of importance or superiority? Does the lack of them make you feel inferior to others who have more than you? Do you casually mention things you own or show them off to increase your sense of worth in someone else's eyes and through them in your own? Do you feel resentful or angry and somehow diminished in your sense of self when someone else has more than you, or when you lose a prized possession? Next slide, Kate. We will get off this train of logic now in just a second. This is the last part, talking about self-identity. One of the most basic mind structures through which the ego comes into existence is identification. The word identification is derived from the Latin word idem, meaning same, and facere, which means to make. So when I identify with something, I make it the same. The same as what? The same as I. I endow it with a sense of self, and so it becomes part of me, my identity. One of the most basic levels of identification is with things. My toy later becomes my car, my house, my clothes, and so on. I try to find myself in things, but never quite make it, and end up losing myself in them. Thank you for bearing with me through that. Now here is the point. Tolle is saying we are not things. And it is why things do not bring us ultimate satisfaction. It is the long-time philosophical issue. Both Kant, Kierkegaard, John Stuart Mill, Aristotle, they all approached this issue and said, what am I? What is my identity? And what they all concluded something different, but they all also concluded something the same. And what was the same is that there is more to me than matter. That there is more to us as human beings than this physical body. One of the philosophers says what really caused him to think about this was he was working in his workshop and a guy cut his hand off with a saw. And his hand was repaired and he was restored to health after several months. And he said what he realized was that no part of the man's consciousness was lost with his limb. So he said to him, there must be something else. You cut a finger off, you cut a leg off, any limb. You've not lost who you are. You are still something different than this physical body. And that is what Solomon was driving at. If you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, he says over and over again, under the sun, man has no value, under the sun. There is no meaning. There's vexation and vanity under the sun. That is, without God, all these things are meaningless. How can we say of ourselves? You ever look at a picture, somebody comes over to your house, and you look at a picture, or I like the one, no offense to real estate people, because I'm in real estate too. But you ever see those, they got a picture they hand you, and it doesn't look anything, it looks like they took it 15 years ago or something. Have you ever looked at an old picture of yourself and said, now that's me, but you don't look anything like you look. Your hair is either turning gray or turning loose. So how can you say, that's me? How can you say, it doesn't even look like you? Because your physical body is not who you are. There is more to us. And that's what Solomon was saying in chapter 3 and verse 11. You are eternal. And any time you are doing something that is temporary, it can never satisfy that which is eternal. And that's the point that he's making here. Next slide, Katie. We're talking about things. I love this quote from Deepak Chopra. He said, letting things go is an act of far greater strength than getting them. Rabbi Zacharias says this, anything that endures for a shorter time than the soul does is incapable of satisfying the soul. We're looking in the wrong place for satisfaction. We're looking in the wrong place for meaning. It's like the boy who lost his quarter in the alley. And somebody walked by and said, what are you doing over here in the street? And he said, I lost my quarter in the alley. And he said, well, why are you looking here? And he said, because there's more light here. That's what Solomon realized. He said, I was looking in the wrong place for meaning. If you want meaning, he says, when he gets to the end of this book, if you want meaning and you want quality life, he said, here's the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments. When you do these things, all of these, there's nothing wrong with these things in and of themselves, but you won't find ultimate long-term pleasure in them. And the only way you'll find ultimate satisfaction is realizing that you are an eternal being. Next slide, Katie. It's one of my favorite. This is actually a true story. This is Dr. McDougall. And you'll see, these are real experiments he was doing back in 1906, I think it was. The next article is the New York Times. What he's trying to do is find how much does the soul weigh. And he built this contraption where you push the bed up on this weighing scales, and as a person is really close to dying, both of them sit on ladders. One of them is watching the person that's dying, and the other is watching the scales. And when the guy that's watching the person dies raises his hand, that's exactly when the guy who's watching the scales writes down the weight. And then go to the next slide. And here's what they said. The soul has weight. Something has gone from the body. Well, I don't know about that. But we have grappled a long time with this fact. What is there about us? There's something else in us than just this physical being. And until we understand that, we will not find ultimate satisfaction. Next slide, Kate. Al Sullivan, real quick, I'm going to go through this. Al Sullivan went for a quadruple bypass. First of all, let me give a disclaimer here. I am not a person who goes into much detail or even reads any of the garbage or most of the garbage out there about out-of-body experiences or I'll tell you who knows about those: dead people. That's all I'll say. But Al Sullivan, National Geographic did an article on Al Sullivan. Okay, you just keep rolling through these. Quadruple bypass. This was his doctor, Dr. Takata. Keep going, okay? All right, goes in for the surgery. You can see that there's a curtain over him. He's covered up. You can't see it right here. This is him hovering over the room. Next slide, Katie. And this is the doctor that's doing surgery on him. Now he has blindfolds on, he has a curtain on. And the doctor, I hope you can see, he's doing this number, stretching, while he's performing the surgery. Next slide, Katie. And just leave that for a second. When the guy wakes up, he's never seen this doctor before, but when he wakes up, and this is just to storm your will, this is just to get you thinking, he asks the doctor, first of all, the doctor is not a Christian. He does not believe in an afterlife. But he asks him, what were you doing? What was all that chicken wing stuff you were doing? And the doctor was befuddled. He said, now, how could you know that? You were under deep anesthetic. You couldn't even see, even if you weren't under an anesthetic, he quotes the National Geographic magazine. He couldn't know. And what he said was, I was looking down at the whole thing. I saw you. I was not there. I was looking. I don't know how to describe that. Don't know exactly what that means. But here's a guy who does not believe in an afterlife saying, there's no way he could have known. There's more to us than meets the eye. We're almost there, folks. Okay. Okay, go to the next slide, please. I think this might be the last one. We realize that the soul, our consciousness is our identity. That eternity is our destiny. Have you ever noticed? I bet you cannot remember the last probably significant achievement that you had or somebody else had, but I bet you can remember the last time you helped somebody that had a need. Somebody that could never help you back. And the reason is that those are the kind of things that bring us satisfaction. Have you ever noticed that? You help somebody out that can't have possibly ever help you, you will gain great, tremendous satisfaction from it. Whether it's volunteering, but all of the things you do for yourself, there's not a lot of satisfaction in it. That is because when you're doing something for someone else, you are administering to your eternal soul, to your real identity, who you are. The first law of thermodynamics, I'll stick to that, says that energy cannot be destroyed. The consciousness is energy. That is who we must identify ourselves with, or what we must identify ourselves with, our own consciousness. That my son Colin bought me a book for my birthday recently called The Morning and Evening Star. A century ago, there was a star that would raise in the east. They called it the morning star. There was a star that would raise in the west. They called it the evening star. They were convinced that they were two different stars. But once we became more technologically advanced, we realized it's the same star. And what I want you to realize this morning is that many people think, well, we have this life and we die and that's it, we're done. And then there's a different life. We don't know what it is. But that's not the case. And that's what Jesus says in John chapter 5, verse 24. Most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life. He shall not come into judgment, but he has passed from death to life. There is no death, he says. Because who you are and what makes you eternal is your consciousness. And when you administer to that, that is what will bring you meaning to life. When you exit the stage, or this life, it's very much a part of the play. as entering the stage. I don't know what the next stage of life brings, as Solomon did not. But I didn't know what this one would bring either. And I think trying to describe the next life is like trying to inform an unborn child about this one. It's just not possible. You can't conceive of it. But rest assured that there is someone painting the room pink. There is someone buying all of the trinkets and the toys. There is someone who's buying that machine that's going to make sure that that child doesn't get carbon monoxide poisoning. There is somebody who is making preparation for that child to come into this life. And Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. If it were not so, I would not tell you. And so the meaning of life, he says, is in chapter 12 and verse 11 through 13. The words of the ways are like goads, and the words of the scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. I love that. A well-driven nail given by one shepherd. In verse 13 he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter then. Fear God and keep his commandments. True fulfillment, Rabbi Zacharias says, does not depend upon obtaining loftier achievements or exotic pleasures. Rather, it comes from knowing a loftier person in the person of Jesus Christ. That's where you will find meaning in life. You've listened well. Thank you. And we'll partake the Lord's Supper now. You'll join us. Sorry, we'll have a prayer, please. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the privilege that we've had to come together and to hear these gospel songs, to praise your name and doxology, and to revere who you are. We're thankful for the life of Christ, for the person of Christ, for the example that he has set before us. Help us, Father, to be above those things that bring us true and ultimate satisfaction. Prayer, spiritual things that will bring us a lasting and a meaningful life. Help us to set aside things and to identify ourselves with who you are and what you would like. In Christ's name we pray.